It was just past midnight, and the apartment was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you notice every creak of the floorboards and every hum of the refrigerator. I had settled onto the worn leather of my couch with a book, the soft lamplight casting a warm circle around me. Outside, the rain drizzled in soft, uneven rhythms against the window pane, leaving dark streaks that reflected the streetlights in a blur of gold and silver. I was alone, or so I thought, letting the quiet stretch around me like a comfortable blanket. And then a knock. 3 sharp raps at the door, insistent and deliberate, made me jump, my heartbeat thudding in my chest. I froze, hand halfway to my book, listening. Another knock followed, this one slower, almost playful, as if whoever was knew exactly how to get my attention without alarming me. A shiver ran down my spine. The night was too late for casual visitors, and my mind started racing. Maybe a neighbor? A delivery? But something in the tone, the way it lingered in the hallway, felt different, confident, almost teasing. I set the book aside, heart still quickened, and approached the door. My hand hesitated over the handle as a mix of curiosity and caution battled inside me. I caught a whiff of rain-wet air from the hall, mingled with a faint scent of something floral, sweet, but not overpowering. Whoever it was, they weren't just ordinary visitors. Before I could even turn the knob fully, I glanced through the peephole. 2 women stood there, both poised, both seemingly calm despite the late hour. There was an effortless grace to them, the kind that makes a room, or in this case, a hallway, feel warmer, more alive. Their eyes met mine through the small glass, and I felt, immediately, that this wasn't random. This was deliberate. I stepped back for breath, trying to steady myself. My apartment, usually a sanctuary of quiet solitude, suddenly felt charged with a tension I couldn't name. The rain pattered softly behind them, the night's darkness pressing in on every side. For a fleeting moment, I questioned my own sanity. Who comes knocking at midnight and carries such certainty, such presence, with them? And then one of them spoke. Just a few words, low and smooth, barely louder than a whisper. "You're not escaping tonight." The word struck me like lightning, warm and electric. Part of me wanted to slam the door, retreat into my solitude. But an equal, stronger part of me was curious, unreasonably drawn to them. Who were these women, and why did their arrival feel like the beginning of something I wasn't prepared for, but didn't want to resist? The knock came again, soft this time, insistent in a different way, as if urging me to decide. And in that instant, standing in the dim light of my apartment, with rain seeping through the cracks of the city outside, I realized that tonight, nothing would be ordinary again. This expanded keynote sets the emotional tone, builds suspense, introduces the character's intriguing presence, and subtly plants the first seeds of attraction and tension, all while keeping it slow burn and YouTube safe. I opened the door. The hallway light spilled across the threshold, catching the 2 women in sharp relief. One stepped forward first, a soft, confident motion, brushing her hand lightly against my arm as she passed. The contact was fleeting, almost accidental, yet left a warmth lingering on my skin, a spark that shouldn't have been there at this hour. She smiled, an easy, knowing curve of her lips, and apologized softly for breaking the rules of midnight. Her voice was calm, almost musical, with an undercurrent of mischief that made my chest tighten. Behind her, the second woman lingered, a quiet grace in her stance. She didn't rush in. She simply watched, and I felt her presence pressing gently against me, not in weight, but in gravity. The air between us felt charged, taut in a way I couldn't explain. She reached out, offering me a cup of steaming coffee, her fingers brushing mine ever so lightly. The warmth from the cup spread into my palms and seemed to radiate further, mingling with the subtle warmth of her touch. I stepped aside to let them in. The apartment, which moments ago felt empty and still, suddenly seemed alive, almost breathing around us. The scent of rain clung faintly to their clothes, mingled with a delicate floral note that was neither overpowering nor cloying, something soft, grounding, intoxicating without intention. They moved through my space with natural ease, each step careful but unhurried. One of them perched lightly on the edge of the couch, letting her knee brush mine as she adjusted herself. It was subtle, almost imperceptible if I wasn't paying attention, yet I felt the quiet electricity of her proximity. The other leaned slightly against the counter, a hand resting near mine as if unconsciously seeking connection, though it could have been purely practical. Every movement seemed charged with a deliberate intimacy that I couldn't ignore. Their conversation was soft, teasing, almost conspiratorial. I noticed the way they shared glances, small smiles, and subtle nods. Silent communication I wasn't yet privy to but was eager to decipher. They asked me mundane questions, lightly, as though the mundane itself could be extraordinary when spoken in their presence. Each word, each laugh, carried a rhythm that seemed to settle around my chest, drawing me in. I realized then how unprepared I was for this kind of attention. I had lived alone long enough to know my routines, my boundaries, but boundaries suddenly felt porous, irrelevant. Their confidence was magnetic, not overwhelming, but coaxing me forward with each glance, each delicate brush of a hand. I caught myself noticing little details, the slight tilt of one's head as she laughed, the way the other's fingers lingered on the rim of the cup she held, the soft fall of hair across her shoulder as she shifted closer to me. I wanted to step back, to take control, but the warmth, the quiet insistence of their presence made me hesitate. For the first time in a long while, I was not in control, and I didn't mind. That night, the world outside ceased to matter. Rain pattered against the window. The hum of the city was distant. I was acutely aware of their presence, the brush of their hands, the quiet magnetism in their gaze, and the subtle way the apartment had transformed from empty walls into something intimate, something charged. And in that silence, in that stillness, I realized that my night, my entire rhythm of life was about to change. This keynote deepens emotional tension, establishes the first physical touches in close proximity, and continues building intrigue while staying subtle and YouTube safe. After a while, the room settled into an odd rhythm, the kind that only emerges when strangers become unexpectedly familiar. Rain tapped lightly against the window, a soft percussion under the low hum of quiet conversation. One of them, the woman who had first stepped inside, tilted her head with that same playful confidence and suggested a game. Not a game of cards or of dares, but a game of stories and confessions, truths shared in the dark of midnight where no one else could hear. The invitation made my chest tighten in a way I wasn't ready to analyze. There was something audacious in it, yet there was also care. She wasn't demanding, just offering a gentle nudge into something private, something intimate. The other woman leaned in, her presence steady, her eyes sparkling in the candlelight I'd lit after they arrived. There was an unspoken understanding between them, a silent choreography I wasn't part of yet, but which drew me forward anyway. We moved to the living room, the couch suddenly a space not just for sitting, but for proximity. One settled beside me, her shoulder brushing lightly against mine as she shifted to make herself comfortable. The warmth of her arm, the soft press of her side against mine, made me hyper-aware of every sensation, the weight, the heat, the rhythm of her breathing. My fingers brushed hers when I reached for my cup of coffee, and the contact lingered, a spark that was quiet but undeniable. The game began in whispers. One would pose a question, light, teasing, but edged with curiosity, and we would answer honestly. I found myself revealing pieces of myself I rarely spoke aloud. Small regrets, fleeting dreams, a fear of being overlooked. And when I did, they listened, truly listened. The other would reach out sometimes, brushing a thumb across my wrist or letting her hand rest lightly on my knee. Small gestures that anchored me, made the confessions feel safe, even cherished. There was an intimacy in their attention that didn't need words. I noticed how one's hair fell just so across her shoulder, how the other's fingers flexed lightly as she waited for my response, how they shared a brief glance that spoke volumes without me needing to interpret. Each movement, Each tiny touch was electric, charged with a tension I didn't yet understand but couldn't ignore. I caught myself stealing glances at them, at their laughter, the curve of their smiles, the quiet gravity they carried. The night seemed to stretch infinitely, time slowing as if the world outside had paused. Every brush of their hands, every subtle leaning in, made me ache with a desire to reach closer, to lean in myself. Yet hesitation held me back. I wanted to respect the space between us, even as I longed to cross it. The game, simple as it seemed, became a conduit for something far larger. Trust, connection, a magnetic pull that neither words nor logic could explain. By the time the first hour had passed, I felt less like a man hosting unexpected guests and more like a participant in a quiet, unspoken intimacy, drawn into a rhythm I had never imagined for myself. And as I glanced between them, feeling the warmth of their presence on either side, I realized that tonight was no ordinary night. Each confession, each brush of skin, each shared laugh was laying the groundwork for something that might last far beyond midnight, something delicate, fragile, and entirely consuming. This expansion elevates the emotional intimacy, builds slow-burn tension, and uses sensory-rich touches and body language to deepen connection while remaining YouTube-safe. The candlelight softened, casting gentle shadows across the living room, and the rhythm of our midnight game slowed. The rain had tapered off, leaving a faint scent of wet asphalt that mingled subtly with the floral notes lingering in the room. The earlier laughter had faded into a comfortable quiet, the kind that feels both fragile and inviting. It was the first time I noticed the vulnerability beneath their confidence. One of the women, the one who had brushed her hand against my arm when she arrived, shifted closer to me, her shoulder lightly pressing against mine. She spoke softly, almost hesitantly, about a fear she had carried for years, a fear of being truly seen, of revealing herself fully and being misunderstood. Her voice trembled slightly, a crack in the otherwise smooth confidence she wore like armor. I could feel the heat of her presence against mine, grounding me in a way that words alone could not. The other woman, sitting across from us, leaned forward, resting an elbow on her knee and tucking a hand loosely under her chin. Her eyes softened as she shared her own admission. Hesitation in forming close bonds, a quiet longing for connection that she rarely voiced. I noticed the subtle tension in her posture, the way she angled toward me just enough to feel included, yet still maintained her personal space. There was a magnetic quality to it. I wanted to reach out, to close the distance, but I also wanted to honor her careful balance. When I spoke, I let my words come slowly, honestly. I shared fragments of myself I rarely allowed to escape. Small regrets, moments of loneliness, the weight of being young and searching for someone who sees me as more than my age or appearance. As I spoke, I felt their attention settle around me like a gentle warmth. One of them reached out then, lightly brushing her fingers across my wrist in a gesture of reassurance. The contact was fleeting, but it made my chest tighten in a way that was at once comforting and unsettling. Their eyes never left mine. There were moments when our gazes locked, and I felt the quiet gravity of being truly witnessed. The room, once just a living space, now felt intimate in a way I had never experienced, walls fading into the background, leaving only the subtle, tangible presence of each other. The light brush of a hand, the gentle shift of a body closer, the shared laughter that lingered in the pauses between words. They spoke of connection without needing to force it into declaration. I became acutely aware of the way our physical proximity mirrored the emotional closeness unfolding. One rested her hand lightly on my knee as she laughed at a memory. The other leaned just slightly toward me, so that when she adjusted her position, our arms brushed against one another. The sensation was gentle but electric, a reminder that intimacy isn't always loud or dramatic. It can exist in soft touches, shared silences, and the unspoken understanding that each person is safe enough to be seen. By the time we paused, the confessions had created a quiet cocoon around us. I felt a deep sense of connection, a fragile trust that was as thrilling as it was grounding. And in that suspended moment, I realized that the night was no longer just about mystery or surprise. It was about the slow, deliberate weaving of hearts and hands, an intimacy that promised something far deeper than fleeting attraction. This expanded keynote heightens emotional intimacy, subtly deepens physical closeness, and maintains a slow burn, YouTube-safe tone. I excused myself to the kitchen under the pretense of making more tea, but every step I took felt heavier than it should have. The apartment, once a haven of solitude, now felt alive with their presence, humming quietly in the spaces they occupied. The faint sound of their conversation drifted behind me, soft and melodic, like music just beyond reach. I could feel their proximity even though they weren't directly beside me. Energy, warmth, subtle gestures lingering in the air. As I poured boiling water over the tea leaves, steam curling into the dim light, I realized how acutely aware I was of them. The woman who had leaned against my shoulder earlier was now adjusting her position on the couch, and the slight tilt of her head, the quiet way she stretched her hand toward her cup, made my pulse quicken. The other stood near the counter, her hand brushing lightly against the edge as she leaned in to say something. Every movement was intimate in its own way, every glance a whisper of connection. I found myself hesitating, aware of the sudden intensity of my own thoughts. Desire had begun to unfurl in quiet, almost torturous ways. I wanted to reach out, to let my hand brush against theirs again, to feel the warmth of a lingering touch. But hesitation pulled me back. The age gap, the unexpectedness of the night, the delicate balance of consent and curiosity, it all pressed against me, whispering caution even as my heart urged me forward. I felt a sudden, almost dizzying awareness of the small spaces they occupied near me. One woman's knee occasionally nudged mine when she shifted. The other's fingertips brushed against my forearm when she laughed. These were gestures that should have been insignificant, yet they reverberated through me like soft electric currents. My mind raced with questions. Was it appropriate to want this closeness? Did they feel the same pull I did? And yet, beneath the caution, there was an undeniable thrill, the kind that comes when connection teeters on the edge of possibility. I leaned back against the counter, letting the warmth of the teacup seep into my hands, trying to anchor myself. But their presence was magnetic, and I could feel the tension building in the quiet moments between their words. Every glance exchanged between them seemed to echo across the room, making me aware of my own longing, my own need to bridge the distance. I wanted to be closer, to lean into the warmth, to let the subtle brushes of skin and whispered confessions guide me. And then, almost without thinking, I found myself smiling. Desire and hesitation existed side by side, tangled together in a way that was exhilarating and terrifying. I realized that tonight was no longer about playing it safe or keeping boundaries rigid. It was about navigating the unspoken, letting connection grow in moments both fleeting and deliberate. I took a slow sip of tea, feeling the heat spread through me, and glanced toward them. Their eyes met mine briefly, and in that instant, the hesitation felt less like caution and more like anticipation. The night still held so much uncertainty, but the pull between us, quiet, electric, undeniable, was a force I could no longer ignore. This expanded keynote intensifies the narrator's internal conflict, heightens subtle romantic tension, and continues building YouTube-safe, slow-burn intimacy. By the time the rain had fully stopped, the apartment had transformed into a quiet cocoon of warmth and shadow. The city beyond the windows felt distant, a faint hum behind the soft glow of candlelight and the lingering scent of tea and jasmine. We found ourselves on the couch, a small cluster of bodies drawn together, not by necessity, but by an unspoken desire for proximity. One of the women rested her head lightly on my shoulder, and the weight of her presence was immediate and grounding. I could feel the subtle rise and fall of her breathing, the gentle warmth of her hair brushing against my chest. It was intimate without needing explanation, a quiet affirmation that she trusted me enough to let herself be close. The other curled an arm around my back, fingertips grazing my skin through the fabric of my shirt. The sensation was soft, electrifying in its subtlety, and it made my own skin tingle with awareness. I shifted slightly, careful not to disturb them, yet wanting to feel closer. The brush of their hands against mine and the occasional contact of knees or elbows created a rhythm that was delicate but charged, like a language we were learning together. Every movement carried intention without words, a silent conversation of trust and desire. I noticed the way one's eyes softened as she looked up at me, how the other's fingers flexed gently, as though unconsciously testing the boundaries of our closeness. The room was quiet except for the occasional rustle of clothing or a whispered comment. I realized I could hear the subtle cadence of their breathing, the quiet rise and fall of bodies that mirrored my own. The moment was suspended in a way that made time feel irrelevant, and I found myself acutely aware of each sensation. The warmth of their bodies, the texture of their hair against my skin, the faint scent of their perfume mingling with the lingering aroma of tea. I felt a profound sense of connection, an intimacy that went beyond the physical. This wasn't about desire in a conventional sense. It was about presence, trust, and the quiet acknowledgement of one another. Every touch, every subtle shift in position carried weight. Their hands on my arm, shoulders brushing mine, heads resting lightly against me. It was a language of closeness that didn't need to be spoken aloud. For the first time that night, hesitation melted into acceptance. I allowed myself to lean back, letting the women find comfort in my presence as I did in theirs. A hand brushed my cheek lightly, a fleeting, almost imperceptible gesture, but it sent a warmth through me that made my chest ache with quiet delight. A brief glance exchanged between them made me realize that this was a shared intimacy, something triangular yet balanced, tender and safe. In that midnight embrace, all the tension of the earlier hours, the uncertainty, the hesitation, the quiet longing, resolved into a serene, encompassing closeness. I felt anchored and elated simultaneously, aware that the night had shifted us into a space that was ours alone. Here, in the gentle rhythm of bodies and breaths, I understood the depth of connection we had begun to weave, a slow, deliberate intimacy that promised more than a fleeting encounter. This expanded keynote brings the emotional and physical tension to its peak while keeping it YouTube safe, emphasizing meaningful touches, proximity, and shared vulnerability. The first hints of dawn crept softly through the blinds, casting pale streaks of light across the room. The night, which had felt suspended in time, was giving way to morning, and yet the warmth of their presence lingered, heavy and comforting. The apartment, once quiet and solitary, had become a space alive with intimacy, memory, and subtle connection. I remained on the couch, feeling the echo of their closeness even as the world outside nudged us toward reality. They stirred gently, as if reluctant to break the spell of the night. One lifted her head from my shoulder, her eyes meeting mine with a quiet smile that held everything the night had been: trust, desire, laughter, and confession. The other adjusted her position, fingers brushing briefly against my back as she rose to stand. Every small gesture carried significance. The lingering touch, the warmth that refused to dissipate, the silent acknowledgement that the connection we had shared was real, deliberate, and enduring. I walked them toward the door when they finally prepared to leave, though it was clear neither of us wanted to part. The city outside was waking slowly, the air cool and faintly scented with rain. Our hands brushed as I held the door, and that brief contact, gentle and electric, felt like the culmination of everything that had unfolded. I noticed the subtle tension in their bodies, the small hesitation in their movements, and I realized that we were all reluctant to let the night go. One of them stepped forward first, her fingers lightly brushing mine as she traced an almost imperceptible line along my wrist. Her gaze held mine for a long moment, unspoken words passing between us. The other placed a hand softly on my shoulder, her thumb grazing in a slow, deliberate motion, grounding me even as my chest swelled with a quiet ache of longing. There was no urgency, no need for dramatic gestures, just the gravity of connection, of mutual recognition, and of shared intimacy that defied the constraints of time and age. I lingered in the doorway as they stepped into the morning light, watching them move with the same effortless grace that had drawn me in hours ago. The rain had left tiny puddles on the pavement, reflecting the soft gold of streetlights fading into daylight. And though they left my apartment, I felt their presence still, woven into the quiet spaces of the room, in the lingering scent of jasmine and the warmth of their touches on my skin. As the door closed, I exhaled slowly, a mixture of contentment and longing settling in my chest. The night had been extraordinary, not because it had been fleeting or unexpected, but because it had allowed three people to find one another in a quiet, deliberate intimacy. I felt a deep, abiding sense of connection, a knowledge that this was not the end, but rather the first dawn of something gentle, patient, and profoundly real. I stood in the soft morning light, the apartment quiet once more, but alive with memory. The night had left me changed, not just by their presence, but by the way it had reminded me how powerful trust, touch, and unspoken understanding could be. And I knew, with quiet certainty, that the bond we had begun to weave in the dark of midnight would remain, a subtle warmth in the spaces we each inhabited, waiting for the next time we might find one another again.